Hello, I want to welcome you all to the power of our story. We are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. We're dedicated to building a tribe of servant leaders, supporting one another through life's challenges, and empowering each other to move forward with strength and purpose. Our weekly groups and stories remind us that no one heals alone. Today, I want to thank Sergeant Chris Gregorio of the Seattle Police Department and close friend of the Power of Our Story tribe, who will be facilitating this important talk today with Meagan McCarthy. So a little bit about Meagan. Meagan McCarthy was a deputy sheriff for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department for 6 years, serving in various capacities such as CPS liaison, school resource officer, recruiter, and explorer coordinator. Meagan was involved in an on-duty shooting, which was caught on video and highly publicized. The suspect attempted to execute Meagan after brutally beating her. 4 years later, the trial began, and due to failed law enforcement legislation, the suspect was acquitted and subsequently freed from custody. Meagan was medically retired for PTSD and has now dedicated herself to advocating for first responder mental health and victims of crime. She serves as a co-chair on the Crime Survivors Board, providing insight to victim resources and advocating for the first responder community. She now works to advocate for the mental health, first responder, and victim communities, speaking at various conferences, political events, and news interviews. She was awarded the prestigious Above and Beyond Award from Crime Survivors for her work in advocacy. So now, let's dive into today's talk. Chris?
Good morning. Thank you, Sarah, for that. And Meagan, thank you for being here. And everybody, thank you for coming to listen to Meagan share her story. Just a real quick intro on how we met. We were at the Wounded Blue together last year, and she told her story. And I'll tell you what, it was life-changing and impactful. This is a year coming. I'm so glad that you're here. And I think that everybody that's going to be watching this and listening to this in the future will probably be just as impacted heavily as I was at that time. So Meagan, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys so much for having me. You're right. We are about a year overdue. A new Wounded Blue conference happened. So this is definitely long overdue, but I'm so thankful to be here with you all and to have an opportunity to connect and share. And that's really what's so powerful about what you guys do.
It's absolutely amazing. So I don't want to go into any of your story at all. If you just want to kind of set the stage, I'm sure a lot of people have read about it or seen the videos, but from your perspective, if you just want to start from the very beginning as to how your journey began.
Absolutely. And I'm going to make this very footnote version. I want to be able to talk to other people, so I don't want to take up too much time. So if there's any further questions anybody has, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm an open book. I'm very raw and real, but I just want to be able to connect with others through this. So on September 4th of 2019, I was working as a deputy sheriff for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. It was the first call of the day. You know, back when this was 2019, we didn't have body cams. We only had their audio recorders, and I was riding a single man unit. I responded to an unknown problem. It was a mom calling about her son. She was telling dispatch, oh my God, get my son out of here. But we didn't really have too much more information than that. So I arrived about 10 minutes after that initial 911 call. And as soon as I break the driveway and the road, the door flies open and out comes a suspect walking towards me. We've made eye contact. He knows I'm there and he's very upset. Out comes his mom following him with a knife. Long story short, about 17 seconds into my arrival, he begins assaulting me. I tried to do the verbal commands, the defensive tactics, get on the ground, all the things we are taught, and he was just non-compliant from the very get-go. So we ended up fighting for about 2.5, 3 minutes. And then unbeknownst to me, there was a neighbor in an upstairs bedroom filming at about the 2.5, 3 minute mark. So by this time, he had punched me over and over in the face. I broke my eye socket. I was definitely losing the fight. I am not proud to say, I I'm an MMA fighter and I was able to go 10 rounds in the ring. I wasn't. We fought for a while and I started to feel, those black curtains coming over my eyes. I knew I was losing consciousness. And that's when, this video kicks on and you can hear me telling him, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to shoot you. And it was my last ditch effort to try and get him to subdue and to comply. I was trying to de-escalate. I didn't want to shoot this son in front of his mom because at the end of the day, that's what he was to her, regardless of what had happened in that house. So he still punches me. We fall into the ground. I take aim at him. I miss. And then he traps my hand above my head like this. We start fighting over my gun. He's able to overpower me and take my gun. And while we were fighting with it, his hand got into the trigger well with my hand and a round was discharged into the ground. Well, that round ended up stovepiping. So it was definitely God watching over me that day. But he takes my gun and I turn onto my hands and knees and I look up at him and he's pointing the gun at my forehead and I hear the trigger click and I had so much pain to my face from breaking the bones and from being assaulted. I was like, I just got shot in the head. That was the only thing that my brain was processing. But I still was alive. I still was like, my heart's beating, my legs are working, we got to get out of here. So I turn and I run. And as I start running for cover, he's able to clear the discharge and he shoots at my back. Well, during that fight, my radio piece that ran down my back had gotten disconnected. So I remember radioing, I'm 415, which is a fight. And I remember hearing nothing. And it was that hopeless feeling like, man, where's my people? I know we have people on shift. It's first thing in the morning. Where are my people? Well, a dispatcher, I know we have a dispatcher in here, a retired dispatcher. She ultimately saved my life. She knew I was not communicating and she sent the cavalry to me. So at the exact moment that I'm hiding behind a bush, watching the suspect coming towards me with my gun, this is it. I'm going to die. My partners turn the cul-de-sac and 3 of my partners respond lights and sirens and they take his attention. He shoots at them. They get into a gunfight and he's taken into custody and taken to the hospital for his injuries. And I'm taken to the hospital for mine.
Wow. That's a harrowing story.
Yeah.
We'll get into a little bit in the impacts of that but what was the next steps through the hospital?
Yeah, so in the hospital, they did the whole gunshot protocol. They cut my uniform off me. Thankfully I wasn't struck by a bullet, but I had a concussion, the broken bones. I ended up breaking the base of my thumb because we were tug-of-warring over my hand during the fight. But I had CT scans. I was given, some medication and I ultimately was released. And I was very thankful for that because I know that's not the case for a lot of our brothers and sisters. They don't get to leave the hospital. So I went home that day and I went to my parents' house and my daughter, she was 6 at the time. And I remember telling her dad, we had gotten a divorce years earlier. And I told him, I need you to pick up Haven from school. Like she cannot see me like this. So I went home and I just remember going into my parents' backyard and sitting on a lawn chair and like watching the sunset and having this like out of body experience. Like what just happened to me? Because it still wasn't processed in my brain what had happened. I had been in other fights. It was my first time ever being in a shooting, but as a cop in a very busy city, it wasn't my first fight. It wasn't my first altercation, but I went home that day and something was different. Like a part of me had died at that scene, although I was still living. And I didn't really know how to process that. Our department is contracted with the Counseling Team International. So within 3 days, you see a counselor before you're cleared back to work. And I just remember being different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but like my soul had changed. My heart had changed. And, I woke up on September 5th and I felt that identity crisis. Like, being a cop, that's all you really are to a lot of people. You go to the barbecues and it's, oh, this is my, friend Meagan, she's a cop. Or, people introduce you having this esteemed role of being in law enforcement. And I knew I would never be able to be a cop again. Like I felt it in my being that part of me was gone. And I fought with it for about 2 years. I wasn't ready to let it go, but I started diving into the counseling team and I started talking to therapists. And very quickly I began kind of this cocktail of antipsychotics, antidepressants, which I feel differently about now. But at the time, these were really uncharted waters for me. So I spent the next 2 years going through the process, but still being in denial. In August of 2021, I attempted to take my own life on the hands of those prescription pills. And that was really the turning point in my journey, was 2 years later. It was finally taking accountability that something is not right, and no longer can we put on a mask and hide it. You will not make it out of this alive if you don't take it serious. So that is when I really started EMDR and color therapy, and I found a trauma therapist, and I found, I talk about this all the time, but comfort and community. I felt like isolated. My husband's a cop. He's been on the SWAT team for 7 years. We grew, like, our relationship grew on the backs of us understanding each other. But when it came to this, I felt like I couldn't burden him with trying to understand why I can't be a mom and a wife right now. So once I really raised my hand and said, I'm really messed up, I need to focus on my mental health, I went to a therapist 3 days a week. And that was really when I took a hold of my life.
Wow. You said a couple of things in that I want to tap into, because I think that we have, as we're talking about the trauma, we have multi-stages. We have the trauma from the event itself, a trauma from our families and how we deal with that stuff, the traumas of our own shame of saying sometimes, and then whatever happens from the judicial system after that. You said one thing I really want to tap onto here. You said that you were really struggling until you said that I'm not okay, and you had to come to terms with that. What, and I've asked this from a lot of different people, and I don't know that we've ever gotten a pinpoint answer. I'll see if you have one. What gave you the courage to say, hey, I can't do this by myself. I'm not okay. I need something more, especially when you have a husband that's also in the job. I think that a lot of people would say, well, we understand each other. That's why we vibe so well, but maybe not necessarily understanding that there might be a block there, because I don't want to seem weak or something, or I don't know what it was for you that you couldn't communicate with your husband in that. If you could dive into that a little bit.
Absolutely. There was multi levels where I'm having to deal with on a personal level, but then it was also captured on video. So millions and millions of people watched it. And I became the poster child for, like, why women shouldn't be cops. So I carried that shame and guilt of, the worst thing that can happen to a cop is having your firearm used against you, and then for it to be captured on social media. And I grew up in the community that I worked in, and I've been here since 2007. I went to high school here. I went to college here. We all know each other. So now it became like I was ashamed of being out in the world. So I became a recluse, and I was trying to still, have my husband a warm meal when he got home and a clean house. But I'm also, like, hiding in my bathtub because I'm afraid of the trash can lid closing. And I'll tell you, that day that I attempted suicide, that was the turning point. And this is what it was for me. My dad, he was born in 1952. We grew up in kind of a household where we don't really talk about emotions. We don't really talk about feelings. He was a very successful businessman. I was the first person in my family to go into law enforcement, and we never really, like, dove into emotions and hardships. It was just kind of like, that's life, like, rub dirt on it. And my husband came home from work and saved me from overdosing, and called my parents to the house, and we had a little powwow. And I remember sitting on the edge of the couch, and this big, tough man that I had grew up, idolizing for being so strong, came to me and asked me for a hug. He said, Meagan, can I have a hug? And I just remember being like, why? Like, what for? And he was like, because if you would have killed yourself, I never would have been able to hug you again. And I was like, wow, I went in the way that I best describe it to people is when I'm talking is, like, in law enforcement, you get tunnel vision when you get a call of, a man with a gun in this far building. You go straight to that threat. Kind of with, tunnel vision, blinders, you're passing everything by. Mental health is the exact same. I had blinders on. It was only, my life is ruined. My life sucks. I'm not Meagan. I'm not a mom. I'm not a wife. I'm not a cop. Like, what am I? I had these blinders on. And then at that moment, I took the blinders off, and I was like, I have a family that loves me. My dad would have been impacted. Like, my baby's on the floor playing with his toys. Like, I don't believe that suicide is selfish, but my blinders were selfish. And that was really when I said, okay, I have to get better for these people, because my husband deserves a wife and my children deserve a mom that's present. And the very next day is when I started EMDR, and I'm still in EMDR. Here we are 3 years later, and I'm still very thick in it. But that was when I said, I can't just be a zombie in a shell of a human anymore.
My God. So as we go forward, if you haven't seen, this is the power of our story. This is how raw and emotional this stuff gets. Um, this stuff's super impactful. I've got a lot of questions, but I definitely want to open this up. There's some things I want to get to. Um, but the impacts to our family, I think, is one of the things that we really neglect. So I'd like to open this up. I see some people taking some notes and things. Please ask your questions. For anybody that, again, that's watching this is going to be super deep, super impactful. And if this triggers something new, I want you to please reach out. You've got a bunch of people on here. Everybody that's on this link, you can reach out to people yourself, because sometimes these deep conversations will open up some wounds. And I just want you to be aware of that, and know that you do have a support system here. So if you guys will put up your little hand on there, if you have a question for Meagan, we'll start jumping into this a little bit. Janet, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Meagan. One of the things that I've never done EMDR. I was diagnosed in 2003 before anything like that was even thought of, that dispatchers, never mind, police officers, the dispatchers, whatever, experience PTSD. Was there anything, have you done any body work? Because I'm just now, after all these years, things are coming back, hijacking my sympathetic nervous system. And finally found somebody, and just to give a brief reason why I'm asking, the cardiologist wants me to lose 50 pounds. And I was born a year after your dad. But nothing they were wanting to do was anything that I could even imagine, like it wasn't going to work. I finally, the other day, first time ever, I went to a dietitian who does integrated medicine and said, your body's not ready yet. We have to work on the rest of you. And the blood work that she sent me for and the tests she sent me for said my histamine was right through the roof and all this other stuff. And I tried to tell the weight loss guy, like, are you trained in trauma? And he says, no. But she got it. And so my question is then, did you have to go, did anybody work on your body work, the inner part? Like we can do the MDR, and I know that is body too, but I mean, there's so much, like she said, you can't even go on a diet program. You have to do this other stuff to get your body ready to do it. So
I sympathize with you so much. Like, I don't even think you understand how much I do. Once I attempted suicide, I said, I'm never taking another pill again. I will never touch, I don't even take Tylenol. I'm just going to heal my body the way it should be. Not to say that there's not a place for medicine. I just, that's my personal opinion. So I started having these feelings of like menopause. So I'm 31, I'll be 32 in December, and my body started to physically change. I started to lose my hair. I started to develop these issues, gut issues, cardiac issues. So I went to a hormone doctor and I said, my cortisol, I can tell my body is stuck in fight or flight. Like my adrenals are never functioning right. So we ended up taking I had a full metabolic panel done, and my cortisol is through the roof. My adrenal function is basically nothing. I put my body into the state of, now that I'm on, I take hormones. So I do a testosterone injection weekly. I take nightly progesterone, and I take a couple of other things. I take this supplement called Angstify. And what it is it's like ashwagandha. It has a couple of mushroom complexes, and it helps to heal the body from inside, from, like your parasympathetic nervous system, and that rest and digest that is so important in actually healing. I've been on that regimen since April, and I've noticed a huge difference, because I would lose 15 pounds and then I would gain 30 pounds, and my body was just in constant haywire. No matter what I did, I never felt right. And I will say, once I started on the hormones and I take stuff to help with the cortisol levels to help balance it out, I definitely feel way better. But it's very tricky, because there's definitely still some days where I feel like like a sack of potatoes and my body is just not working.
Thank you, Meagan, because I think this is important for people to know, and doctors too. Like the cardiologist didn't even want, he literally said to me, I don't want to hear it. I know the science. But this woman was like a breath of fresh air. And actually, it was through his office and he approved all the tests. So I'm interested in this journey now. So, but thank you so much, because I think it's so important that we think of that body too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Scott.
Meagan, that's a intense story. The way you told it, it seems like you're right there in my mind. I can see so vividly the struggle that was going on. You talked about the moment that your father wanted a hug. The love of a father is so incredible. As a guy, the love of your mom is essential. Moms and sons have special relationships, but I tell you, the love of your father is an amazing thing. And I'm so glad that you have that. I think I've got two daughters. So that relationship, I understand that. And I'm glad that you shared that as part of your story. Your experience, and you said you feel God intervened when, you you could have been killed. And it's amazing how in life we go through so many different experiences and we don't always know, what's going to come our way. But it seems that through your experience, you found who you are. I know that might sound, a little odd, but in finding who you are, look what you're doing now. I say this quite often with folks in this group because I believe it's true. And what I'm saying to that end is instead of you walking away and trying to, carry on with life in your family, you've done that, but you've also turned around to help people. That has become your mission. And maybe that was ordained, right? We go through struggles that we don't understand, and then we come out on the other side. And I think this reveals a lot. And I hope that your walk with God, I hope is very strong. I would imagine it is after this, especially. But thank you for the work you're doing now. This absolutely matters. People need to hear the story because people lose faith in a lot of ways, and you're bringing that with your story. Thank you for digging down and being a resource for people.
Well, thank you so much. I am at a loss of words, which doesn't happen to me very often, but I am very thankful for your kindness. I struggled like almost every day. I would watch my friends go to work, or I would see on the news, like there was a pursuit here, or, one of my partners got nearly mortally wounded. And I remember this feeling of like, I should have been there. I needed to be there. Like, why did this happen to me? And I've never wanted to be a victim. I don't want that mentality, because that's when I really think you allow the obstacle to win over you. Although I was a victim of a crime, I didn't want to allow myself to be like, woe is me. And so after the trial and after that happened, and I saw a side of me that almost became reignited, and I believed in my being, I was never meant to become a cop. I was never meant to wear that uniform for the next 30 years, although I wanted to and I fought for it. I was meant to be here. And I'm thankful for that. And although it took me years of finding that comfort, ultimately, and I was just talking to Sarah about this before we started, like I am so thankful to be where I am today, because I believe in post-traumatic growth. I believe in the foundation that you can actually be a better version of yourself after the incident. And that is 100% me. I'm a better mom, a better wife. I'm a better, servant to God. I'm a better friend. I'm a better just human being. And I don't wish it upon anybody to go through a near-death experience, but when we can normalize the trauma and we can show that there will be a struggle, but on the other side, there's this, I think it makes that struggle worth it.
Yeah. I mean, look at this.
Amen.
You have this exact tribe right here. No,
Yeah,
go ahead,
sorry,
sir.
Chris. Now, I was just going to say again, the struggles that we go through in life reveal God's plan, and then it also reveals who we are in that plan, right? And I believe that wholeheartedly. And again, thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm gonna tap into one thing real quick. You said something about you had this drive, and I remember something you said at the Wounded Blue about being a warrior, and I remember you struggled as you said that. I used to be this warrior. I used to be this warrior. I wanted to be this cop fighting this. But I think you recognize now that you're still a warrior, and now you have this mindset of it's a different battlefield. Tell me how that transformation happened for you.
I think it kind of happened without me recognizing it. After my trial happened and I saw and I don't want to even like go into this because I know it's very controversial for a lot of people, but ever since, the riots happened, we saw this really tangible shift in how we view our law enforcement and our first responders. And I experienced that, like I could feel it viscerally in that courtroom. And then when the acquittal happened and, people were celebrating basically what happened to me and people were thankful that he was acquitted, I had this feeling of like, there is nothing worse than a woman scorned, right? So I said, if this is happening to me, how many more people is this happening to? Yet I'm retired, so I can say something where so often if you're still in an agency or department, you can't speak up because there's a fear of being blacklisted or being, kind of exiled. And I said, you know what? Like I struggled in silence. I almost died in silence. I'm going to heal out loud and I'm going to heal for other people because I talk to people every single day that are going through the same exact journey. Our details may be different, but the struggle and the trauma is the exact same. So I have to say something because if I don't, then I'm a part of the problem. So once I started coming out and saying like, we cannot allow this to be the status quo. This is not okay. Mental health is real. The justice system needs to do better. They go hand in hand. That's when I said like, okay, I can be a warrior without a badge. I can be a warrior without the gun belt. I'm just going to be a warrior, with my words and do what I can to try to help on this side.
That's amazing. So real quick, I want to take the next three questions, and then I just want her to go into a little bit about the post-incident stuff with the acquittal, and then what's going on now, which I think is absolutely amazing. I want you to be able to hit that. Monica, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Sure. Thanks, Megan, for sharing your story. I'm right there with you with being a female in law enforcement and having to prove yourself so much. And then you know how it is when we went on calls, or we always had to prove ourselves, more so with the boys. And when a critical incident or use of force happened, we had to be right in there. We had no respect from anybody. So I'm curious, as and you got some help from the counseling team, how was what, and if there was a shift with your partners, because after an incident we are our worst enemies with talking behind each other's backs and armchair this, and we were in it, and unless you're unseen or unless you're in it, you don't know what's going on. So was there support from your partners, and is there still support from your partners?
Well, I never went back to work after that day. I went back a couple months later and got my stuff from my locker. And I think that was kind of like a symbol to myself and my partners that I wasn't returning. And there's still a couple of people that I still keep in contact with. I think at the very initial first, couple of weeks, people would drop off, food or flowers, or, they would offer to do, like, I remember my sergeant offered to mow my lawn, and I had artificial grass. So I was like, it's all right, Sarge, I don't need that. But like you said, and again, I know this is controversial, but we have to talk about it. As a woman, you're already expected to have a higher standard. So when you're like, hey, I'm struggling, it's like, oh, well, you're weak. Like that's why you shouldn't be here. So I was like, oh, I'm good, guys. Like, get back on the saddle, like, I'll be there. I blamed it on the doctors instead of being like, yeah, I'm struggling. It's like, oh, I can't get a doctor appointment, whatever. So my partners were very supportive. My department, I think people didn't really know what to say. So instead of like saying something, you just kind of like don't say anything. They've come a long way in their mental health programs now, but as the months go on, life moves on, people go back to work, people do things. I didn't expect anybody to like wait on my porch, but as you become retired and you become like, on injury, people kind of forget about you. And that's what happened to me. I was gone for so long. Once we went back to trial, 3 years later, or 4 years later, actually, people were like, oh, I didn't even know that this didn't go to trial yet. Like I kind of forgot, and I don't blame them. I expect people to go and move on with their lives, but I have a couple of partners that I still keep in contact with. I'll be really honest. I think God saw that I needed a bigger community, so he sent me strangers. And that's where I've really, been thankful for with social media is I have like a community of people that it's funny, like I won't post anything for a day and people write me, "Are you okay? Where are you? I'm just checking in." And it's like that sense that people have your back, even though they don't know you. Like we never ran calls together, but like people, it's more than just your partners that you worked with. And that's what I'm thankful for.
Good. Thank you.
That's such great insight. Thank you for that question, Monica. That was perfect. Rich.
Wow, Megan, thank you for sharing your story and what you're doing now. It's amazing. I can relate to part of your story. I was kidnapped as a rookie patrolman after 6 months on the job, and that turned into like the trauma you're talking about with the incident itself, then the family, and then eventually going to trial and having those people acquitted. It just blew me away. That was my descent into alcoholism and stuff. But
Wow.
thank you for what you're doing. Wow, it's amazing.
Thank you for sharing that.
I think that highlights how broken and imperfect our justice system is. There's a lot of political stuff one way or the other. This isn't and always, and it's imperfect. But we try to get it as right as we can, I think. And I try to give that grace, otherwise I'll lose my mind. And I think that as we'll hear here in just a minute, Megan's story, it's not always over. There's a next step in a fight, but we'll get to that in a minute. Catherine.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your story, Megan. A lot of the guys here know that my company was inspired by my dad. So the father piece of your story really hit me in the field. But I had a question. I'm wondering, and this is kind of personal, so if you don't want to answer it, I totally understand. But your video is out there. The video of the incident is out there. And your children are very young right now, but there's obviously going to be a day where they might stumble upon it or kids at school might bring it to their attention. Have you given any thought how you're going to approach that when the time comes?
Yeah, so when this happened, my daughter was 6 years old, and I have two little boys now. They're almost 2 and 4, so they weren't around when this happened. But, my daughter saw me not going to work anymore, and now all of a sudden mom's home all the time. And then, we kind of had the pandemic happen a couple months after my shooting. So now I was her teacher. And at the time, she didn't really understand what happened, but she saw, my wrist was in a cast. She saw my face all bruised. And so I just told her, mom got into a fight at work, and that's what our cops do is they protect us from some evil things, some bad things, but I'm okay because I'm here right now. I'm sitting in front of you. So now my daughter actually just turned 11 yesterday, and she's seen the video, although it wasn't something I wanted to happen. Her dad and I are divorced, and he had on the news. And when the federal government came and pressed charges just a few months ago, that was recirculating and it happened to pop up. And so she saw my picture, and I wasn't there for the conversation, but we co-parent very well. So we were able to have like a roundtable moment and just say like, yeah, this is what happened. We wanted to protect you from it because you were young back then, but this was scary and we know it's scary, but look, I'm right here. You can see me. I can hug you. I can touch you. We can talk about it. So now my daughter and I, we're very open about mental health. And I kind of thank my incident for that, because as a young teenager or almost teenager going through, the motions in school, these are challenging years. So now we talk about all of the stuff that I've learned in therapy. Now I'm doing with her, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things you can see, that kind of stuff. So of course, I'm not thankful that video is out there. I don't even like to watch it myself. And it's kind of been like my defining moment for so many years. But it's one of those things where I feel like if we don't talk about it, it kind of becomes bigger than it needs to be, instead of just having it head on and being like, yeah, this was scary. This is something that can happen to people, but that's why we have people out there to protect us.
Great question. Again, that this family thing, I think we don't talk about very often. And we won't have time to really dive into that today. I would love to have you back on to really talk about the impacts of family and how we simmer those things out. Thank you, Meagan. Holly.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for the opportunity. Meagan, thank you so much for sharing your story today and showing us what strength really can look like. You know, I don't want to say to you, oh, you're so strong, because I don't know how you feel, and I don't want to put feelings on you and expectations. But I think you are showing the power in vulnerability. And when I listen to you, one of my favorite quotes comes up, and that's oftentimes God uses our greatest pain to launch us into our most important calling. And as you said, you know, when you were talking about not feeling like you weren't supposed to end up being a cop for 30 years, he had a higher calling for you, I think, in helping all of our law enforcement and families who have trauma to experience hope, to see hope, to hear hope. You are walking it, and that is really, really powerful. And the story you just shared about your daughter, I think, wow, at this age, she's learning that this world is not easy, it's not simple, but there is hope. There's so much more beyond. Little things aren't going to shatter her like they do people who don't face the truth and walk forward in our suffering. And I think, you know, I just appreciate that you're here. And our stories are so very, very different. And yet I feel a kinship with you in coming through a trauma that for me, mine, I thought would destroy me. I thought I would never, ever live through the death of my child. But I have, and I've discovered what I see in you. And that's that the struggle and the suffering can give us the ability to comfort and others in struggle and suffering. And to me, that's really what brings healing, meaning, and purpose, and service, in service of others. And you're doing it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You know, it's kind of interesting. I'll just say this really quick. My grandma, she passed away in 2020, but her name was Esther. And I'm constantly reminded of Esther 4:14. Perhaps this is a moment for which you were, you know, made. And that's one thing that I carry with me is, you know, we're not always understanding for what moment God will show what our reason and our purpose is, but we have to believe in that. And that's what I live by is, you know, my grandma was watching over me, and, you know, she's watching over me now. And what a coincidence, her name is Esther.
Yeah. You know, I think the other thing too that strikes me is that when you've been through what you've been through, and for me, what I've been through, there's a paradox because in the joy that God gives us when we are able to make sense and meaning out of suffering and being there for other people. That's a paradox, because you never would expect to feel that after all you've been through. But I can tell in your eyes and your smile that you are experiencing that because you're trusting God. So thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Through all these breaks and cracks that we go through, look at the lives that you're healing and saving right now through this. It almost makes it worth it. If it's not worth it, it almost makes it worth it to go through those things.
Yeah.
Paul. Maybe he stepped away. Scott.
Yeah, I was going to go ahead because I'm on round two. I was going to go ahead and give Paul an opportunity. I'm going to give him one more second and see if he comes on.
Paul, are you there? We have enough time.
Okay, cool.
I'm
So Holly, you know, what you were saying is absolutely what I was trying to convey earlier about, you know, folks that turn around and help. You know, they go through all the the pain and stuff that you have gone through, and that's absolutely what you're doing. You're making such a difference, just like Meagan, and there's such beauty to that, and a lot of thankful folks. But what I wanted to ask a question of Meagan, is at some point you realized that you were going to walk away from taking meds. What was that process like? Did you, did you wean off of it, or did you just go cold turkey? Who was helping you through that? Were you getting pushback from the folks that were prescribing? How did that work?
So at the time I was on 6 different prescription pills. I would, have a complaint and I would just get a pill. At this time of my journey, the workman's comp system decided to cancel all of my psych benefits. They said I had exhausted all of my hours, 250 hours came and went, and they were not going to sign me off for any more. And the pills never stopped coming. I actually had to call and tell them, stop sending me medication. Like my drawer is literally full of medication. So that day in August, when I, took a handful of pills and attempted to end my life, I swore to my husband after he, made me throw up in the toilet, I will never touch another pill again. So I do not recommend it. Going cold turkey is definitely not the recommended standard. It's not what's on, the warning label, but I knew I had to, otherwise this cycle would never end. And those were really, really, really tough weeks. But I threw away, or I, properly disposed of all the medication at my local Kaiser, like you're supposed to do. And for about 3 months, the little brown sack of medication kept coming, and I would just send it back. So I eventually told my doctor what I did, and she agreed that I should not be on medication, but she wanted me to slowly transition. And I was like, hey, I haven't touched a single one. She's like, okay, well, if you're feeling okay, then okay. So I didn't really get pushed back. I was very, stand my ground. Like, if you give me these pills, I will kill myself. So don't give me any more medication. Obviously, that's not the proper channels to do it. But yeah, I unfortunately became, I don't want to say a victim, but I became a part of the problem of just over medication and over prescription.
Thank you.
That's a big thing. And my experience is that's not a real huge thing. In my experience with the first responders, that's a ginormous issue with the VA. Everything's just solved with pills, or they think subsided. Paul, your hand was up.
Yeah, I don't want to run over here, so I'm going to be real careful with time. Meagan, first of all, thank you for having the courage to tell your story.
Thank you.
I walked in on a 211, which is an armed robbery for those who aren't from California, and a guy tried to shoot me in the face. There were 11 people robbing in Derry. And I reached for his weapon because I wasn't armed. I was off duty in a t-shirt and jeans and flip-flops, and I just come around the corner from my house to this drive-in dairy. I was supposed to be armed, but I wasn't. And so I reached for his weapon, and he discharged it while I was grabbing it. I broke his arm in the process. And have scars on both sides of my face from shrapnel and gunpowder, but that was all so hot that it cauterized the wound. So I thought maybe it was just something that bounced off the side of my face. And in any event, I did what occurred to you. And that's the purpose for those comments. I want to recite to you a verse, Jeremiah 9, verse 11. For I have a plan for you. It is not to harm you, but to prosper you, and to give you hope and a purpose. And I take that as a promise. And I don't suggest that any of us should have to go through what you did. But sometimes in order for you to identify purpose in life, you have to experience things that A, make you authentic in telling your story, and B, allow you to recognize other people's stories and contribute to them rather than deplete them. We are given several gifts in life. We can't earn them. We can't buy them. And they're salvation, faith, forgiveness, love, grace, and free will. And with each of those, we have a responsibility. And I share that with you and with the rest of the people here. I've said it before, it's not something that's new. But I think it's important to recognize, and I think that you have recognized it. And I think that with help, you have come through this to be where you are today. And while I know it's still emotional and there's still some scarring and wounds, you're moving in the direction of your worthwhile goals. And that's to share your story with others. And I think that's so important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Meagan, if you want to take the next 2 minutes, I know you got to go. We as humans always tend to hold on to the negative things. But sometimes there's some positivity. This story is not quite ended. Can you tell us what's going on now? I know that this Jack Wagon was acquitted through the judicial system. And if I'm wrong here, but it seems like your sheriff was really plugging for something more to happen. Will you go into that for the last couple of minutes? So we have some hope?
I can extend for like 10 more minutes so we can make this worthwhile.
Beautiful.
My babysitter can run.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So basically, my sheriff, Shannon Dykes, was incredible. And he said, this cannot be what happens to my deputies. And he contacted the United States Attorney, Martina Strada. And I can't give too much detail right now because it is still in the process. But the federal government decided to indict him. He was indicted by a grand jury for 3 federal felonies, and he's facing up to 40 years in federal prison. He's currently in federal custody right now. Makes me a little emotional, but a year had gone by, and I knew that the ATF was working on this case, but in lieu of some political matters, it had to be signed off by Washington, D.C. They were not very excited on moving forward with this after he was already acquitted on a state level. And we had so many people championing for the first responder and law enforcement community that said, no, this is wrong. We need to have our law enforcement officers backed. And they did. And, they came and did a press conference in Riverside, and he was arrested, and I went to his arraignment. Well, it's different, in federal, but I was there and I looked at him and I sat there, and that was my moment where I said, this is my second chance at justice. This is my second chance of an ending for me. This is just a chapter, but this is not over. And my first time going through the trial process, I was ashamed. I was guilt-ridden, all of these things. And then when I went to federal court, I was like, I'm capable, I'm strong, I'm going to stand here. So we're currently in that process. We're anticipating it to be a couple more years, but, I'm thankful that the federal government stepped in and, has all of our backs. It's not just about me, but this is setting a standard for you cannot nearly murder our cops and get away with it. So I'm thankful for that. And, I've been blessed to have been able to travel the country sharing my story and connecting with so many people. I have a book coming out next month, which is called Fight to Thrive. I'm very excited about that. And I currently work for Fox News. I'm a West Coast contributor. So I'm able to go down to LA a couple times and contribute on crime and law enforcement matters. So just like you said, post-traumatic growth is real. I never would have thought that I'd be sitting here talking to all of you when, just a few years ago, I could barely brush my hair and get out of my bathtub. So there is good that can come from hardship.
I absolutely love that. Thank you. So again, try not to concentrate on the negative. That's what we tend to do. Make the conscious, deliberate decision to focus on the positive things, and you're never out of the battle. Look, here we are 5 years later. You're still fighting this battle, but now we have a movement forward. Never surrender, never give up, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Real quick, you said you could go a couple more minutes. Michelle, you had your hand up real quick.
Yeah, Megan, I just want to thank you again for sharing your story. Your story parallels in a lot of ways of mine when you talk about the darkness that you went into. But I want to especially thank you for bringing light to the mom aspect. Being a mom and a first responder is so hard. And I feel like when we go through the darkness that PTSD will bring, we deal double time with the mom guilt. So I appreciate you also including that in your story because it's a huge part. It's a huge part of my story and it's a huge part of yours. And I think that we help other women feel more comfortable to be able to speak up. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. You know, my daughter was not immune to all of this. She definitely picked up on some of my mental health projections, and I'm not proud of that. And that's definitely something I talk about now. I mean, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the ACE test, but I'm actually in school for psychology now, and I learned about that. And my daughter's scores at 10 years old were alarming. So she's actually in therapy right now. She goes to occupational therapy and she sees, you know, a child forensic psychologist just because I don't want her to burden with this for the rest of her life because of me. I want to set her up to be, you know, a thriving 10-year-old. She's endured, well, she's 11 now as of yesterday, but she's endured so much already at such a young age that I have a responsibility to set her up for all of it. So yeah, like you said, you know, being a mom is hard enough. And then you add in one of these jobs and it's the hardest job we could do, right?
Absolutely.
Last couple of questions that you just touched on that. The impact it has on your kids. What were the signs that you saw in your kids that it was having that kind of impact? And what ultimately were the signs that your husband picked up on when you were struggling? Because I think that we do a really good job of hiding our bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Even from our spouses who know us the best. What were the signs that he picked up that in you, and what did you see in your kids?
Well, so my daughter, she and I did everything together. I was a single mom for a couple years, and then I met my now husband when she was 5 years old. So he's been in our lives for 6 years now. But, you know, my daughter and I, we used to go hiking. We used to go to the movies. And now all of a sudden I'm the mom that's like, oh, we'll just put on Disney Channel and we'll stay home. So she started to become kind of a recluse with me. And then, you know, the pandemic happened, which really forced people to stay home. And it was no longer that like fun, bubbly dynamic. It was like she could tell I was walking on eggshells around her because I was afraid of, you know, different toys going off, like something behind me would startle me. And so she became anxious and I could tell with her, like she was kind of reclusing from, you know, she didn't really want to like FaceTime her friends because I wanted her to keep that social interaction. She was in first grade, like that's important. She's like, no, I'm just gonna, you know, hang out in my room by myself. And just like little subtle things started to really change. And then when she went back to school, when the schools opened back up, she was very, very withdrawn. And her, you know, her teacher was telling me like, hey, Haven's, you know, kind of not really seeming like she wants to hang out with people so much. And I was like, oh man, that's because of me, because I stopped being that way. She was feeding on me. And then as far as my husband goes, you know, we met doing the job. We actually met on a call out, which is so romantic, but my husband was on the SWAT team and I was on patrol and, you know, love story, right? So we would go shooting all the time. We would go, you know, hiking and outdoors stuff. And I stopped wanting to do any of it. I remember he told me to pick up a gun and shoot it. And I was terrified, dropped to my knees and I was, you know, shaking, crying because I was so scared. So he was like, oh, this is kind of different. But like you said, I masked it for so long. He didn't really realize that I was struggling until kind of the pandemic started to come to an end. And it was like, I don't even want to go to a restaurant. My mom and dad want to go to lunch and I don't even want to see them. So it was really just subtle things that I didn't want to watch certain movies anymore. Just like when you know your person, you can tell there's certain things. And that's, you know, I'm very thankful for my husband for sticking around for those years because they were rough.
Awesome. Sarah, I wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to pitch in here.
Yeah, Megan, I am so proud of you. That is the biggest thing. Just, you know, I'm so proud of you. your strength to overcome and to share how to navigate that when you've had terrible trauma and had such a hard time um, putting the pieces together to figure out even what happened to you and all the things that you had to deal with. I'm just so grateful that you have risen up and are empowering everyone else who hears your story. Your story, there's a lot of side on the human side. There's so many common things that people struggle with, and you have shown people how to navigate that to thrive. So I'm so grateful for you. I'm also so proud of everybody on this call. Um, you are with like-hearted and like-minded, like-spirited people here to overcome and to be part of the solution in this world. So, Meagan, I just want to thank you again for having the courage to heal and to thrive. Thank you, Chris. I always love your talks in how you really draw out such important things in our guests and being part of our group, and all of you. I love you all. So thank you again, Meagan. Thank you again, Chris, and all of you who have come on the call.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Meagan. Thank you for your power, your courage, your strength, and your vulnerability. Everything that you're doing, hopefully we never even recognize it, but you're saving lives every single day. Every time that you get on TV or you go to a conference somewhere, you're talking to a department, I'd actually like to have you talk to one of my roll calls one night if you have some free time to talk about this stuff, because you're right. We need to normalize this stuff. And for everybody that's watching in the future, see all these people here? You're not alone. We are on an island, but it's a pretty damn big island and it's fully populated. So don't feel isolated. Don't feel alone. You're encompassed by love here and judgment-free areas. So join the power of our story. Thank you so much, Sarah, for having us. And Meagan, thanks again, keeping your vulnerability and keep your strength fighting.
Thank you so much, Chris.